Hey, what up, everybody? It's your boy Carson Fox with another episode of Fox on West Virginia Mountaineers Sports. It's the preview show of the BYU Cougars at the West Virginia Mountaineers, both coming into today's contest. Well, actually, I'm recording this on Thursday. On Saturday's contest, with a 5-3 record, 2-3 in conference play for BYU, 3-2 in conference play for West Virginia. It's a 7 o'clock kickoff from Milan Puskar Stadium in Morgantown, West Virginia, and upgraded from FS1 to Fox, nationally televised broadcast, because the Rangers want to take care of the Arizona Diamondbacks in 5 games. So awesome, West Virginia's on prime time in their own home and in their own home field. So if you look at this one on paper from the Vegas odds, I can't believe it. I've seen spreads as big as 13.5. I've seen them as everywhere is really going around 10.5. So, oh my goodness, a spread of double digits in which West Virginia is the favorite. When has this last happened against a non-FCS opponent? Wow, this is cool. Also, a 53.5 over-under for all those who have their eyes on Vegas and the way those numbers fluctuate for betting purposes. Now, I'm going to start off with something negative for this show, and then because it's going to be all positives, because I'm telling you, I got a lot of great facts for you to share for this video. Going to go over the history, going to tell you a little bit about who these BYU Cougars are. Going to break down what in West Virginia has the ball, what to watch for when BYU has the ball, what to watch for. Special teams, prediction, 3 keys to victory. You know how it goes every single week. So the first thing I got to say, and this kind of segues well into the announcement earlier this week, Wednesday it was, that of West Virginia's future schedules with the new scheduling model of the Big 12 Conference, now that Utah, Colorado, and the 2 Arizona schools are joining the conference, in addition to Cincinnati, UCF, Houston, and BYU. And I just, it just felt like that was the culmination of all of the BS that has happened with realignment over these last 3 years. It is just so stupid, and this is just so college football 2023, that West Virginia, a school on really the eastern seaboard, mid-Atlantic, is playing a team from Provo, Utah. If you would have told me even 15 years ago, Pat White senior season, 2008, that West Virginia, first Pitt and Syracuse were going to destroy the Big East Conference. West Virginia would be playing in the Big 12. And then a little over a decade into the conference, that Texas and Oklahoma are going to start this chain link reaction, this domino effect that's going to shuffle all of these chairs on the deck of college football across the country. That West Virginia in the same season is going to be playing Baylor, BYU, and UCF. I'd have told you were absolutely nuts. I just said, where in the world has that come from? But that West Virginia is not playing teams. They did this year, thankfully, teams in non-conference. But if the way that Neil Brown and Ren Baker want to have it, that won't be a forever thing of not having Pitt, Penn State, Virginia Tech, Louisville, Maryland, all of those traditional foes that, as I've said numerous times, would allow West Virginia to reach its optimal point as a program of playing those mid-Atlantic geographic teams. So I'm a little frustrated. I know it's football. I know when Saturday comes and kicks off, I'm not going to care who West Virginia is playing. It's football. It's uncontrollable factor at that point in time. But it's just I have no feeling for BYU. Yes, I want to go and I want to have a good time, and I want to be there with other West Virginia fans. And like I said, once it's kickoff, it's game time, I'm in it. But it's just I don't know anyone who's a BYU fan. No one. You know how many Pitt fans I know? You know how many Virginia Tech fans I know? It's just not, it just doesn't have that same kind of edge. You don't have that same kind of appetite. And I'll feel that in a couple of weeks, because of the history with Cincinnati in the Big East, and because of the proximity, only being 4.5 hours really from, where I live. But BYU, it took them 36 hours apparently to get their van full of equipment all the way to Morgantown from Provo. That's insane. So if you're feeling the same way that I am, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave your comments here, or catch me on Twitter. I saw a funny tweet or something out there from the fake President Gee account, and I commented on it. And so if you find my comment there on Twitter, I laid out, I think what it would be the optimal conference, 8 to 14 teams potentially for West Virginia to be in. So check that out if you like it, and that might be a fun for food for thought video for a later date in the springtime or summertime. And again, West Virginia just has to sit patiently, unfortunately, for the other events across college football to happen, in which potentially the ACC implodes, and then they join the Big 12, or who knows what happens. What power moves does Greg Sankey and the SEC make to potentially bring in some additional teams? Because they're not going to sit still. Anybody who thinks that the SEC is going to sit still and not be proactive rather than reactive has something else to them. They've seen the moves that the Big Ten's now made by destroying the Pac-12 and taking those 4 power players out west. So I'll stop there on that thought. Just saying, I don't have this super excited hate, the feeling that I had for the Backyard Brawl. It's not the same feeling that I have for the BYU game. I just have more so of a feeling of I'm going to this game in attendance, so come check me out over in the green lot in section, I think 130 or 133. It's in the end zone, kind of oh, I wish I could point right there on my screen. I wish I could point it out to you over there. Anyway, but so let's get into it. The history with these BYU Cougars. Only have played once in their over 120 years of college football history together, of 2 programs. In 2016, it was the Cougars meeting up with the Mountaineers at FedEx Field in Washington, D.C. A 35-32 victory for the Mountaineers that had a lot of future NFL players on the field for both teams. It was a game in which West Virginia led the entire time, but BYU consistently fought back for 4 quarters and didn't make it an easy result for the Mountaineers by any means. And it wasn't really until 2 late BYU interceptions that the WVU defense brought in on back-to-back BYU possessions by then quarterback, now New Orleans Saints tight end Taysom Hill, the quarterback for BYU, late in the 4th quarter, that the Mountaineers sealed the deal. WVU forced 4 BYU turnovers on the day, including an exhilarating pick 6 by cornerback Rasul Douglas, another NFL player who was just involved in a trade earlier this week. That was his breakout game for this WVU defense. Quarterback Skylar Howard threw for 330 yards on the day, ran for 27 yards, scored 2 total touchdowns. Jamal Williams, also in the NFL for the Saints, with Taysom Hill. Both rushed for over 100 yards on the ground in that old gold and blue victory. And they were able to pull it out. Non-conference win, really the signature non-conference win. One of 2, I would say, signature wins for West Virginia on that 2016 season. The other one being a big, exhilarating home victory against TCU. I guess beating Texas, anytime you beat Texas, is a signature win. But they weren't really all that great that year. It was just that vaunted 2016 defense by West Virginia that really led them to a 10-win season, but didn't beat Oklahoma State, as we talked about in that preview video, didn't beat Oklahoma, and didn't win the bowl game against Miami. So just kind of was, getting to 10 wins is always something to celebrate, but not necessarily it was a down Big 12 year by any means. So again, but we're talking about BYU. Who are these BYU Cougars, and tell me more about BYU football. So BYU was playing football as early as 1892, but its real modern age started in 1972 when head coach Lavelle Edwards, who BYU's field is now named after, took over the program, which was at that time playing in the Western Athletic Conference, aka the WAC, which I think still does exist in basketball, I do believe. Edwards quickly became BYU a WAC juggernaut, winning the conference title 11 out of 14 years before its national championship winning year in 1984. And the program earned the name Quarterback U for consistently producing All-American quarterbacks, including Gifford Nielsen, Mark Wilson, Jim McMahon, and Steve Young, most notably. BYU rose to the top of the pack in 1984 when it went undefeated 13-0, defeating Michigan 24-17 in the Holiday Bowl, which was the de facto national championship game. Quarterback Ty Detmer won the 1990 Heisman Trophy, and BYU went on to win 9 more WAC titles before Edwards ultimately retired after the 2000 season, just like Don Nehlen. So BYU under head coach Bronco Mendenhall, now in the Mountain West Conference, was successful through the mid to late 2000s, finishing the season ranked 4 times and going to a bowl game every single year. So not necessarily keeping them at the same heights that Edwards had, but still pretty decent program, BYU. BYU left the Mountain West after the 2010 season to become an independent, which, and this is where BYU's national brand argument can really come in, never necessarily hurt BYU financially. They created their own deal, television rights deal with ESPN that was on level par with what teams in the ACC were making as recently as 2019. So now they, along with UCF, Cincinnati, and Houston, have become the 3 most recent teams to join the new, not the new Big 12 conference that includes Utah, Colorado, and the Arizona schools. We'll just call them the new Big 12 because of these 4 new teams that have joined this year. And why I say I would argue BYU is a national brand is because they obviously have the like Mormon like acclamation or whatever, that just anyone who's Mormon in the United States is pretty much a BYU fan out there, and they mostly reside out there in Colorado, and it's like, down the lots of legacies within, the Mormon religion, sending their kids off to BYU. So they have, you watch some of their games. Their Lavelle Edwards Stadium's just as big, if not bigger, I believe, than Milan Puskar Stadium, especially when they have a game at night. Always sold out, always raucous. They really show out. They really support their program. They really support their team. And they rate well, especially whenever Utah's in the conference as well. The Holy War, that matchup is going to be one of the top rivalries in the new Big 12, the 2 of them. And it again, if it wasn't for the geographic proximity between Provo and Morgantown, there might be a little something here. These are 2 programs that have had their heydays, per se, in the national spotlight. BYU obviously having a Heisman Trophy winner, obviously winning a national championship, but not having that success for over 40 years. So it's fun having BYU, I would say, in the conference. It's just I have no feeling for them. I have no feeling for them in the same way I don't have any feeling for Baylor, Texas Tech, a lot of these other Big 12 schools. So I'll stop there. As you can tell, I'm a little irked on that, but it's been tough sledding for BYU despite having a 5-3 overall record. So you might say, what are you talking about, Carson? You run through their schedule. Sam Houston State, a new FBS school coming up from the FCS. They only beat them at home 14-0 in week 1. Then they beat Southern Utah, who's one of the worst programs in all of Division I, and that's a program that I think just became Division I not all that long ago. So you crushed them 41-16 at home. This is their good win, but this was before really Arkansas fell off the map. They went on the road to the SEC and beat Arkansas 38-31. So that's their, I would say, signature win of the season. That's awesome for them. They came home, or then they went back on the road for their Big 12 opener, lost at Kansas 38-27, came home, again, a night game against Cincinnati. I think it was a Friday night contest, upended the Bearcats, another new Big 12 team, 35-27. Then they went on the road and got waxed at TCU, 44-11. Came home, won a close one against Texas Tech, who's again playing without Tyler Shuck at quarterback, 27-14. And then last week on the road at Texas, 35-6 loss. So winless on the road in Big 12 play, all 3 losses. Coming on the road. Now they're on the road again. So only having 2 home Big 12 games to start out the season. You kind of look at that schedule and you're like, oh man, wish you would have had a few more home games to get rolling in conference play or feel them out. So, but last week against Texas, that 35-6 loss, that was one of those games I really think that you need to see the highlights to understand the context behind the final score and the statistics. It was just a 21-6 game at the start of the fourth quarter. BYU had come up with a big 4th down stop at its own 2-yard line, took over with some momentum, drove it 30 yards before a slightly errant throw by quarterback Keaton Slovis went through the outstretched hands of wide receiver Darius Lassiter, and it went straight into Texas safety Michael Taft's hands, who then brought it back 30 yards on the return inside BYU's 10-yard line. They go up 28-6, and there isn't enough time for BYU to make the comeback and the difference. And Texas rolls to victory. So I'm not trying to make any other excuses for Slovis, but the first interception he threw early in the first quarter was a ball that was deflected at the line of scrimmage, but was thrown so hard that it carried all the way to the defensive secondary unimpeded for an easy interception. So 2 turnovers right there that I don't put all of the blame necessarily on Slovis trying to make a play. I know he was only 25 of 40 on the day. So not the greatest completion percentage numbers from that standpoint. And BYU really couldn't move the ball on the ground. This is a storyline we'll talk more when we break it down. Just 95 yards rushing on 26 carries, which includes 2 sacks on Slovis. The defense kept running back Jonathan Brooks, who's arguably the best back in the Big 12 with Ollie Gordon at bay, with just 98 yards on 16 carries and a touchdown. But he, Jaden Blue, and Keelan Robinson all had rushes of 23 or more yards on the day for a unit that finished with 184. So Texas was really able to run on BYU more than their per-game allowed average. And again, Malik Murphy by no means was any big deal passing the ball, but he did for filling in for injured quarterback Quinn Ewers, but he did hit wide receiver A.D. Mitchell twice for 2 deep touchdown receptions on the day, so that was a difference, I feel like. That Texas just made some big plays, settled in, didn't allow a touchdown on the day, just 2 field goals, and came away with a victory at home that they needed. So taking a look further at this BYU team beyond the Texas game, this is one of the worst teams in all of college football in rushing, averaging just 81 yards per game. They have the worst total rushing, and then one of the worst total rushing. Wait a second, pause. They have the worst total rushing and the worst total, so passing with rushing, offenses in the Big 12. Sorry, I had to understand that one there for a second. So passing, a little bit better. They're rushing, terrible. And it's just been a little bit down. I think, like I told people in the preseason poll episode, that BYU is not very good in 2022, though they did play a more difficult schedule in terms of Power 5 opponents in 2022 than the other newcomers to the Big 12, but I just don't think there was this offseason they were necessarily really prepared talent-wise for the Big 12. So they spent in the portal to bring in Keaton Slovis, who had an underwhelming year at Pitt. So while it probably still cost BYU to spend to bring him to Provo, I don't think they necessarily emptied the entire war chest to go get him. But they're letting him take BYU as far as he can take them. As if you look at the numbers, game in and game out, which they might already be there with just 5 wins on the season. With this game against West Virginia, 2 home games against Iowa State and then Oklahoma, but are in the top 7 in the conference, and then Oklahoma State on the last game of the season finale on the road. So Is this a team that's already hit its ceiling at 5 wins, or are there more to be had? I don't know. This is a defense that by the numbers doesn't look all that different from West Virginia necessarily when you look at it, allowing 26 points per game, 392 yards per game, but 237 through the air to 155 on the ground. Here's the difference. They do have 18 turnovers forced, between 12 interceptions and 6 fumbles recovered. Something I want to jump around and talk about is taking a look at this defense. This is a defense who's played really, really well in the red zone. Let me see where I have this here in my notes. Just for 1 second. Yeah, a really good red zone defense. I think that I'm going to tell you more about it. I think this is one thing, and I'll tell you in the special teams unit, believe it or not, I think 2 areas that's kept BYU in a lot of their games this season. They're only allowing opponents to score red zone touchdowns at a 48% rate on 25 attempts, which is good for 14th in the country. Allowed 12 touchdowns and 6 field goals on the season. So when they get inside, the opponents get inside the 20, BYU bears down and they're ready for you. That's when they'll let you get their yards, I guess, between the 40s, but then once you get close, that's when they bear down and they want to come at you. So the other notable part, and this is what I think is one of the key storylines of this game, is, again, we have to address it, is West Virginia going against Kedon Slovis specifically. He's the guy who got away that West Virginia wasn't necessarily able to get its revenge on this year in the backyard brawl. You would have loved had Kedon, I don't know, would Kedon Slovis have made the difference for that Pitt team on that night in the backyard brawl this year in Morgantown? Not sure, but he doesn't necessarily escape Morgantown entirely by running away to BYU. So I think if you remember on social media last year and you've seen it pop back up this week, we all remember what he said, trying to fit in with his newfound friends coming over from USC to Pitt. And there was a lot of trash talk said by Pitt before that 2022 backyard brawl at their little hootenanny down at Heinz Field. So we remember what he said, and he's not going to be able to get away from it. So what I will say about Slovis for this year, by the numbers, 4th in the Big 12 with 16 passing yards on just a 58% completion percentage. Does have 12 passing touchdowns to 6 picks with 3 rushing touchdowns on the season. So he's doing it all really for BYU, even though they're now calling for his head and they want to see the backup. But I think 2 other players who are non-quarterbacks have thrown passes for BYU this season. So again, it's as far as Slovis is going to take them, I feel like, because their running game, which we'll talk about here in just a little bit, has been practically non-existent. So let's talk about what to watch for when West Virginia has the ball, and then what to watch for when BYU has the ball. And I'll throw a little bit of my opinions and analysis in here with that. So first and foremost, when West Virginia has the ball, I think you stick with your strongest point. You fight with your best spells, and that's running the dang football. Now, West Virginia is 16th 16th in the nation, averaging 203 rushing yards per game. So just like we saw last week against UCF, seeing Garrett Green use his legs, C.J. Donald get going, Jaheim White was sensational in that contest in Orlando. This is exactly what I talked about preseason, is that West Virginia could lean on this veteran offensive line with a mobile quarterback. We're finally getting to see, and we saw it like last week finally, what a Neil Brown offense can be when you have a mobile quarterback and you can run the dang football. That was awesome last week. Continue it against this BYU team that, again, got worn down as the game went along against Texas. So just keep pounding them. The one thing that can be talked about in regards to running the football is no Doug Nestor at right tackle. So really a frowny face. lost Wyatt Milam for a game, lost Tomas Remak for 2 games, now missing Nestor at right tackle for at least a game. You wonder if West Virginia, if Neil Brown's trying to get him healthy to potentially to come back for Oklahoma next week on the road, that you want to have your line fully intact, to give him this game to rest up. So the question becomes, will we have the Nick Malone experience at right tackle, or will Brandon Yates go out to right tackle where he spent some of his day in his 4 years in a Mountaineer uniform? Will he go back out to right tackle, then slide in Jaquay Hubbard there at right guard? What's this starting offensive line mix going to be? I want to see that as this game envelops. And does West Virginia then, with a strong side being the left side, do they decide to run the ball more left than they do right? Or what do you know? Do you flip? And I don't think you do this, but do you flip Milam over to right tackle? Probably not. To even it out again, I guess that still gives you the same question of what do you do at tackle then. So I want to see what this rushing attack looks like, but I think we're going to see the same kind of results as we saw against UCF, maybe even more runs in between the tackles or in between the guards really behind Zach Frazier. So one of the guys, though, I do like on this BYU defense is sophomore safety Crew Wakely, number 38. He was the team leader last week in tackles versus Texas and had the easy Malik Murphy interception that was really thrown right to him. But he looked like the fastest closer to the ball, in my opinion, of what I saw in the highlights, that Wakely just really was. I guess he's been dealing with some injuries throughout the season. We'll get to that in a second, what BYU's been dealing with in the injury department. But getting him back out on the field was big for the Cougars in that game, despite a loss. So watch out for Wakely at 38. The 2 guys who make the most tackles for this team are their senior linebackers, Max Tooley at number 31, and AJ, I love this name, Vong Pachong, number 10. So they're going to be in on the tackles most often. But again, this whole BYU defense, it just seemed to get worn down as the game went along against Texas last week. So West Virginia used its offensive line, pound them with C.J. Donaldson, who's still kind of, I would say, fresh, even though he's had more carries now at this point in the season than he did for all of his games last year as a freshman. I think he has more gas to burn on this season. We haven't seen him get this huge workload of 20 or more carries on the season, and I know Green's seeing a lot, Jaheim White's getting used, and you still have Jalen Anderson and Jalen Johnson, but C.J. Donaldson you can use to wear down, because BYU's going to do that same thing with a big back at you. So the other point I'll say about West Virginia's defense is I don't know necessarily about the deep ball. I was calling for that last week against UCF to come out in attack mode, as Neil Brown calls it. First play, bomb down the field to E.J. Horton. Hearing this note from Jed Drenning, the signal caller, the BYU defense has allowed the fewest pass plays of 40 or more yards on the season and fewest pass plays of 40-plus yards allowed overall for the year. And I think this has to do with BYU being an older veteran team, just the fact that BYU and having their mission designation that every player has to go on a mission, and thus they're by total age older than most teams that they play collegiately. They're fundamentally sound, they're veterans, they just know how to play sound football. And if you like Beanie Bishop, you'll like BYU's junior cornerback number 0, Jacob Robinson, with 4 interceptions on the year. But at the safety position, this is what I was alluding to, has been an absolute merry-go-round for BYU on this season. They lost star safety Micah Harper to a season-ending injury in fall camp. And before that, before backup Talon Alfrey got hurt, and he's still out despite being projected at the beginning of last month to return in the month of November, and he's still out, and it's now into November. Tanner Wall's done for the season. No Marcus McKenzie in this game. Two other defensive backs. They are getting Cam Garrett back for this game, so you got to go back really. I feel like 2 games to the Houston game is when Green, had his most success throwing the ball downfield. I don't know. I don't know if I necessarily have a great feel for this game. I think it's going to come out in my three keys to victory necessarily situationally for how this game plays out. But I think you can run the ball. I don't think that, but I don't mean that that West Virginia needs to become a shell of itself that it did in those games against Pitt, like we saw early on in the season, and then in the first halves. I guess first series against Oklahoma State, and then first half against Houston in those two losses, but really put it behind them last week against UCF. Maybe we see some of that. I still think Green's going to use his legs. So does Green use less of his legs and more of his arm in this contest? And when he does throw the ball, is it those 10, 15-yard sail routes that he likes to throw to Devin Carter down the sideline, getting Cole Taylor involved? Or will we see equal to or more bombs down the field to, say, an E.J. Horton or a Traylon Ray? That's what I don't know. BYU is a totally different team when it plays at night. You see that most notably at home when their raucous crowds getting them going. So you're going to have the exact opposite with a raucous Morgantown night crowd for this one. So how does West Virginia take that, harness it, and then use it in its offense? I don't know. Does it can just go ground, or does it throw deep? You do get Hudson Clement back at wide receiver, so I'm interested to see how does that wide receiver mix work out, in which you were getting Rodney Gallagher involved, especially in the run game with 3 carries last week. Traylon Ray went down with a bit of an injury, just a little tweaked, but it sounds like he's going to play. So who are the pass catchers? Who gets involved for this Mountaineer offense? I'm going to be watching that for most of this one. And this was my fourth point, but I think I already addressed it, is, I want to see West Virginia stay in attack mode. If they play the same exact way with the same exact outcome as they did against UCF, I will absolutely take it. No questions asked. You didn't turn the ball over offensively, except for that freak third down fumble play to Jalen Anderson where you try to wacky trick play. And then you got an interception back on it. So it's I don't know if that was really a consequential turnover. It was very, low in penalties, as has been this offense all season long. So I just want to see West Virginia continue to play clean football and come away with victories. That's really it at the end of the day. That's all we can hope for. So style points, this just isn't the year for style points, I don't feel like. So despite being a double-digit favorite, being at home in a night contest, I don't think you necessarily need to have style points in this one. You can just win by single digits and come away with a victory. So let's transition to the other side of the ball. When BYU has the ball, what are you looking for out of this BYU offense and this West Virginia defense? And I want this West Virginia defense to be as aggressive as they were in both backyard brawls last year and this year. Send the hounds after Keaton Slovis. This offensive line unit isn't doing much necessarily, even though you have a Kingsley Solamatea, or I hope I'm pronouncing his name right, at left tackle, who was a first-team All Big 12 selection preseason. Now they are, but their leading rusher, number 27, freshman L.J. Martin, who's big at 6'2", 205 for a true freshman. I feel like only has 438 yards on the season on 96 carries, but he's out. He's listed as doubtful for this one. I don't think we're going to see him. They do return junior running back Aiden Robbins, a transfer from UNLV, who's much bigger, 6'3", 240. But he's been hurt for most of the season, only playing in 4 games, only has 134 yards on 43 carries. So come after this guy who hasn't had that much playing time this year. Come after Slovis, get him. Go after them and send the dogs. Just like how aggressive you were, I feel like, in that TCU game as well. Now, I do like their receivers. There's 3 wide receivers who have 25 or more yards on the season. They're led by Chase Roberts with 33 catches for 459 yards and 4 touchdowns. But the guy I like, who made an unbelievable catch in that Texas game last week, was Darius Lassiter. I mean, if you go back and watch these highlights, watch the way he has a defender over his back. He's got the safety coming in kind of low at him, like on his chest. He goes over the safety who's coming in to make the catch, almost pins the ball on the helmet or the back of the safety in front of him while being hit from behind by the cornerback, rolls over and makes a catch. Unbelievable catch. It was fantastic. So if he can make those kind of high-quality catches, I hope this West Virginia defense is ready for him. So watch over him and watch over Roberts. There's also Isaac Rex, another great name for BYU, 25 catches, 332 yards to just 1 touchdown on the season. So play with reckless abandonment. You're going to have the crowd involved all night long. It's all going to be a wild night atmosphere in a conference game in November for this crowd. So feed off that, bring the energy, and I don't think you have a super threat like Oklahoma State had in Ollie Gordon to beat you. You know what Keaton Slovis can do. He's not going to run the ball. He's going to be playing from within the pocket. So. And they've struggled to run the ball. So, that's just what's so uncharacteristic, for me as a BYU team. BYU teams are just known to run those, pro-set, hard-nosed. I mean, you think back to 2020 when they were one of the top-ranked teams in the country, went on the road against Coastal Carolina, and you just thought, whoa, these are 2, outside dark horses out of the G5 who could potentially make the college football playoff. Neither did, but it was still, Zach Wilson being the quarterback at BYU, Grayson McCall for Coastal. That was such a fun atmosphere. So now you got Slovis, and, he's the only thing holding up this BYU team, I feel from going 0-4 down the rest of the stretch. So come after him, frustrate him, and just, okay, I'll save it for my 3 keys to victory. Let's take a look at special teams. The kickers are just about equal. Although I just love Michael Hayes. I still love the guy. He came up 2 for 2 on the week last week with a long of 41, now 9 for 10, 90% on the season. On the flip side for BYU, Will Farron, 8 for 10 on the season from field goals tries. He's money inside 40, just like Casey Legg was for the Mountaineers, the last few years. But just 3 of 4 from beyond 40 in his season long being 46. He's 0 for 1 from beyond 40 or from beyond 50. So it seems like his long for the season being 46. We'll see if he tries any more from longer distance in this game on Saturday. Here's the big key that people need to take note of, and I'm glad I talk about special teams on these videos for people because I think it's something that gets overlooked. Punter Ryan Recco, I hope I'm pronouncing it correct, Recco. He has 48 punts on the year, so almost twice as many that Ollie Straw has. He's got a 49-yard average on his punts, which is 3rd best in the country. He's got a long of 70. He's got 15 punts inside the opposing 20 and 24 punts over 50 yards for the season. So he's one of the best in the country, could potentially be an NFL guy moving forward. And no slouch on the other side for West Virginia and Ollie Straw. Still last week he only punted twice. But both times he pinned the UCF in Knight's territory, inside their own 20. So this is going to be a great punting matchup between those 2 punters who are going to go blow for blow. And the punt returners, West Virginia definitely has the edge in Preston Fox, who's still averaging 11 yards per return on the season. Only 13 returns total for BYU's 2 returners, Hobbs Nyberg and Parker Kingston. And on the season, they're averaging both just 3.6 yards per return. So nothing there. Also, BYU did give up a punt return for a touchdown to Texas last week, so something to keep note of for potentially West Virginia to do in back-to-back weeks against the Cougars. In the kickoff department, or kick return, nothing really needs to be said either way. They don't have a touchdown on the season, so it's really just offense, defense, and then the punting game that you want to take note of for this BYU team. So my 3 keys to victory, which I love to talk about, and we talk about in the recap episode this past week against UCF, and thankfully I was able to hit on it 3 for 3. So what I want to say, my first key to victory for West Virginia is playing with a lead so that you have the chance to bury them. So what do you mean by that, Carson? Again, in 2016 when West Virginia played BYU, Shelton Gibson had over 100 yards receiving. Again, Russell Shell was running the ball really strong. Again, Skylar Howard had a 300-yard passing day, but you only came away with a 3-point victory. So you showed out, you balled out. Your defense needed 4 takeaways to win that ball game, and you still only won by 3 points. So West Virginia was such a different team, I felt like, last week than they were at home against Oklahoma State. I know, different opponent, better opponent. But when West Virginia is playing with a lead that they have not had for many of these last 4.5 years under Neil Brown, I just feel like you can't necessarily sit back and get complacent like, we got this from here on out. But it's just like not having to fight from behind changes the way, think back to the Orange Bowl in 2012 with how once West Virginia with Geno Smith and Tavon Austin got up 2 scores, forcing Taj Boyd and the Clemson offense to pass the ball often, pretty much taking Ellington out of the game. Totally different story. So I think that's what you need to do in this contest, is to just pick up where you left off last week against UCF. I know things don't transfer from game to game necessarily. It's a new 60 minutes against a new opponent in a new environment, but just continue to pick up where they left off against UCF and continue to play with a lead, because I feel much better about this contest with the potential for West Virginia to blow BYU out. Again, being a 10.5 to 13.5 point favorite in this one. If you start out with a lead and play 7-0, could get up to 14-0, so on and so forth. And why I say that leads into my second point, is this is a revenge game against Keaton Slovis. Again, he's the last soldier standing for the enemy that West Virginia needs to go through to complete the beating, the retribution against Pitt from 2022's loss at Acrisure Stadium. So, and again, the BYU faithful apparently are already calling for him to get pulled after that game last week against Texas. And I think this is very similar to a JT Daniels type of situation in which, last year for West Virginia is just like they're scared to go to somebody else at quarterback, and you're just putting all your eggs into one, the basket of a 6th-year senior quarterback to see how far he can take you. And again, while they'll try and work Robbins back into the flow and run him, and we'll see to possible success, it's going to fall down on Slovis to pass the ball in this West Virginia defense if he gets pressured. And he's good at escaping pressure. He was good in escaping pressure last year when he was with the Panthers. So get to him. He only took 2 sacks against Texas last week. Get him to the ground. Hurt him within the legal limits of the game, as I said last week. And then the third thing is really, I don't want this to be a game of West Virginia getting pinned in crap field position, like what happened against LSU in 2011 for those who were there against Brad Wing. Or even just a couple of weeks ago against Oklahoma State, West Virginia in the third quarter got pinned inside Oklahoma in their own 10-yard line, couldn't get anything going for 2 possessions. Then finally Oklahoma State scored, West Virginia responded, and then it created more of a even matchup. But if you can get out of crap field position outside your own 20, what I don't want to see happen is West Virginia get off on some easy 3-and-outs, or even 1 first down for BYU, then they get off the field on third down, and then Rec Al just punts the ball all the way down the field, and West Virginia starting out inside its own 10 consistently. So that's what I think is keeping BYU within games, and that's what gives their defense then more chances out there for these turnovers. And we saw That's what happens, like, if you're not necessarily a perfect, in air quotes, offense, like UCF proved to be last year. You can put up a ton of yards, and that's all fine and dandy, but at the end of the day, it all matters what you do in points. So putting the ball in the end zone or kicking field goals. And that, like, the turnovers killed UCF in that contest. So that's what I mean is I don't want BYU to get into this punting like game, kill West Virginia in field position. West Virginia owns clock, tears them up in yards. You can just see from a physicality standpoint that West Virginia is owning them, but you only are having, a 3, 7, or 10-point lead at any point in time. I mean, I'll even take a 10-point lead into the fourth quarter, that's for sure. But just like, you get where I'm going. It feels almost like a soccer match. Like one team is owning the, time of possession, shots on goal, so on and so forth, but it's still a 0-0 tie. I don't want to see that for West Virginia. So do they, in special teams, try and get a little aggressive and try and come block a punt? I guess we need to necessarily see how the situationality and the flow of this game goes. And that's what I'll say about my prediction. I'll go back to my preseason predictions, and again, this was, I think, like the 4th victory in a row that I was calling for West Virginia out of its bye week, when it would going to start out 2-3, catch fire against Houston, Oklahoma State, UCF, BYU, up to the Oklahoma game. So this would be their 4th win in a row. Instead, lost those 2 games, but now coming home with a lot of momentum after that victory against UCF. So I'm feeling confident in a win, in a West Virginia win. I just don't know necessarily how much. That's why my preseason prediction, I thought this could be a lower scoring affair by West Virginia's and Big 12 standards of saying like 27-20. But I feel a little more confident in West Virginia's offense than just 27. I think we could see a 34-17 BYU or West Virginia victory. I think that this defense can come after Keaton Slovis, that they're working in their old starting running back. I think the Mountaineers, the Mountaineer Nation's going to show up for this one, be raucous, be loud. The defense is going to cause mayhem in the backfield on Slovis, and who knows, one thing or another, I can see them getting held to just 17 points. If they could only score 6 on Texas, I think West Virginia can hold BYU under its per-game average at 27 on the year. So I think they could get down as far as low as that, and I think they could score somewhere in the ballpark of like 34 points. If they scored 41 on UCF, I think they have that same potential this week against BYU. So maybe I'll just be a little bit conservative. Again, not having a great feel for this game of winning by 17, which would be nice. That would be the biggest West Virginia Big 12 win in terms of point differential, since I always point back to that game, that 24-6 victory against TCU in 2020. So I'll say Mountaineers win. They're going to win, like confidently win. Just by how much? Is it just a 27-20 game, or could we see it a little bit further apart at, say, 34-17? So I want to hear your thoughts, feelings. What do you think on my prediction? What do you think about the keys to victory? What's your feeling in this game? I'd love to hear from you. Leave your comments here on YouTube. You can tweet me at Carson_Fox27. If you like this video, give it a like. That's great, so then it can show up to more Mountaineer fans across YouTube and other social media platforms. Also, if you like this video too, subscribe to my channel. I try to bring you every Thursday a preview video for the upcoming Saturday, a recap video on Sunday, so I'll be back on Sunday for you, and then some, other episodes in between this week. Nothing really necessarily other than the schedule to talk about, which I did at the beginning of this video for this week that was special per se, but let's see how this week's goes. This could be big for the Mountaineers to come away with another conference victory, stay in contention to potentially, who knows, get one of those 2 spots in the Big 12 Conference championship game in just a month. Staying pace with that, getting to bowl eligibility. How big would that be? I mean, for a team that was picked to finish last in this conference to get to bowl eligibility, like that's checkpoint 1, I feel like, for Neil Brown. Also in hopes of keeping his job past 2023. So getting him comfortably off the hot. I mean, it's like it gets real razor hot and then he gets off. So like, let's see what it means in this. So just go out there and keep stacking victories and send the Cougars home with an L. And Keaton Slovis most importantly. So thanks for tuning in. Hail West Virginia, go Mountaineers, and I hope to see you at Mountaineer Field on Saturday. Take care.